Meanwhile, as Democrats try to pick up the pieces, Congressman Richie Torres is calling out his party's left flank. The New York Democrat posted on social media the day after the election, writing, quote, Donald Trump has no greater friend than the far left, which has managed to alienate historic numbers of Latinos, blacks, Asians, and Jews from the Democratic Party with absurdities like defund the police or from the river to the sea or Latinx. There is more to lose than there is to gain politically from pandering to a far left that is more representative of Twitter, Twitch, and TikTok than it is of the real world. The working class is not buying the ivory-towered nonsense the far left is selling. And Congressman Torres joins us now. Congressman, good to have you with us. This is not new for you, by the way. There have been a lot of Monday morning quarterbacks who said, yes, I saw this coming, and here's why it happened, and dissecting it. You've been warning about a lot of this for a long time, and as you say, you were not surprised Donald Trump won.
Look, it was shocking, but not surprising.
Right.
And look, the far left is a gift to Donald Trump, and it will keep on being the gift that keeps on giving until there's a serious reckoning with the results of the election and a serious recalibration. The far left of the party is pressuring the party to take positions like defund the police or open borders that alienates the vast majority of Americans. Like most Americans are in the center, right? That's not a statement of personal policy preference. That's a statement of political reality. When the Republicans swung the pendulum too far to the right on abortion, the American people punished the Republicans in the 2022 midterms. Their red wave became nothing more than a trickle. But if we swing the pendulum too far to the left on public safety and immigration, then we will pay a price as we did in the 2024 election. And when you swing the pendulum too far to the left, it elicits a public reaction that will make our country more right-wing, not less, more restrictionist on immigration, not less, and more conservative on public safety, not less. So it has the opposite effect of what is intended.
These swing states were very close. Donald Trump swept all 7, but they were still very close, as we've been saying all morning. I think what raised other eyebrows, though, is how well he did in areas people didn't expect him to. Take your district, for example. What did you hear from your constituents before and after the election about why some of them, maybe black voters or Latino voters, Asian voters, moved toward Donald Trump?
Look, the simplest explanation is almost always the best, and the simplest explanation is inflation and immigration. Working class communities of color are hit the hardest by inflation. And then on the subject of immigration, there was genuine political malpractice. You know, since 2022, there has been an unprecedented wave of migration, whose impact was felt not only at the border, but in cities like New York, where the shelter system and our municipal finances were completely overwhelmed. I think Quinnipiac found in December of 2023, 85% of New Yorkers were worried about the impact of the migrant crisis on New York City. Despite clear signs of popular discontent, it took the Biden administration 2.5 years to issue an executive order restricting migration at the border, and by then it was too late. The Republicans had won the issue, had weaponized it against us. And when the president issued the executive order, polling revealed that it was popular among the American people, among people from every racial category, blacks and whites, Latinos and Asians. So if it was effective at reducing migration at the border, and if it was popular among the American people, why did it take 2.5 years to issue the executive order? Because it was unpopular among far-left elites who have outsized power over the policymaking and messaging of the Democratic Party, and therein lies the problem.
So, Congressman, I've been speaking to some of the senior folks in the Biden administration in recent days, and they do acknowledge privately 2 regrets. One, you just mentioned, that they should have moved on the border sooner than they did. The other is they feel like they needed to deal with inflation differently. First, acknowledging it was a problem sooner, and then messaging it. Because it does, poll after poll suggests a lot of Americans, no matter what demographic they belong to, were unhappy, which is how things cost. It contributed to the sense of unhappiness. That's a harder one. And I would say White House officials I've talked to said they're still not sure what the right approach would have been. What do you think?
I'm actually more sympathetic because when it comes to inflation, like we were truly a victim of circumstance. Like unprecedented supply chain disruptions during COVID led to record inflation. And when you're the party in power in an age of inflation, it's a political death sentence.
Was there too much money put in initially?
For me, inflation was a global phenomenon, and global phenomena are best explained by global causes. So I would not attribute it to any local factors, but I feel like the Biden administration was genuinely a victim of circumstance. And for me, we did not have a messaging problem. We had a reality problem, right? Inflation is not a messaging problem, it's a reality problem. And no amount of messaging is going to make people feel good about inflation.
But some of what happened in these elections were inability to turn out younger people and the base. So can you make that square?
Look, I mean, I think if you have a status quo marked by an inflation shock and a migrant crisis, it's going to have a depressing effect on turnout.
Yeah.
Like, the data was crystal clear. Again, I was shocked but not surprised by the results, right? More than 70% of Americans disapproved of the Biden administration. More than 70% of Americans felt like we were on the wrong track. And in recent political history, there is no precedent for an incumbent party winning a presidential election when the majority of people think that the country's on the wrong track.
Nika?
Congressman, I'm just curious back to the issues pertaining to the border, which I think you bring up a great point and were a huge issue. And I know that you mentioned that it took too long for President Biden to act with an executive order, but also with probably the strongest bipartisan legislation Republicans could have ever gotten, and Trump killed it, as we've discussed.
Yes.
And so my question is it just the administration and them being too slow on issues because they did make major moves on them, or were there other factors like disinformation and the Republicans not telling the truth about that? I mean, Donald Trump killing legislation that would have actually helped with the problem in a significant way that was co-written by James Lankford. That's not nothing.
Well, if you remove inflation and immigration from the table, we win the election because Donald Trump's net favorability has been chronically underwater. So regardless of disinformation, we would have won the election were it not for structural causes like inflation and the migrant crisis. Mm-hmm. And you look, Republicans have no interest in governing, right? Their only interest is in demagoguing the issue of immigration. So the bad faith of the Republicans is extraordinary. But here's the hard political fact. When you are the party in the presidency, you are held accountable for everything. And the American people are allergic to the substance or even the appearance of incompetence. So when Donald Trump was incompetent in managing the COVID-19 global pandemic, the American people punished him in the 2020 election. And when the Biden administration demonstrated incompetence in managing the migrant crisis, the American people punished a Democratic nominee in the 2024 election. Incompetence in a time of crisis is a political death sentence. And when there is a fire...
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
And I think when there is a metaphorical fire provoking a widespread public outrage, you have to act decisively to extinguish that fire, or else the voters will decisively punish you at the ballot box.
And Mika makes a great point that there was a bipartisan bill.
Right there.
Republicans deliberately killed it. The problem is that going back before that in 21, 22, 23, you had a crisis at the border that leaders in the Democratic Party pretended didn't exist, right? I mean, and so this is the sort of thing that, again, the numbers were so massive. And the denial was so complete that obviously that overwhelmed any good that would have come by signing on to a bipartisan bill, right?
Look, you have to level with the American people. Like, the American people are not stupid. You cannot gaslight them. People know the reality on the ground. People know their own lived experience. And the Republicans, again, have been acting in bad faith and did sabotage a bipartisan border security compromise and should be held accountable. But the president had the unilateral ability to issue an executive order restricting migration at the border, and he waited 2.5 years. And that, to me, is political malpractice,
yes,
and we should be honest about it.
It is political malpractice. And Willie, if you want to know where the voters were that knew the most about this, look along the southern border of Texas. That borders with Mexico. You could go back to 2012, even 2016. It was still predominantly Democratic. Now it's red from El Paso all the way across. I mean, it has shifted over the past 4 years, especially, but really the past 8 years, it has shifted dramatically to the Republican Party.
Yeah, Donald Trump won all those counties down along the border, and among the swing state victories, his was the largest in the state of Arizona, obviously also a border state. So, Congressman, I was talking earlier about people coming up to me on the subway yesterday during the Veterans Day parade and saying, what are we going to do? Is it going to be okay? New Yorkers. I'm sure you're hearing some of that. If you are an immigrant, if you're a woman, if you're someone who feels threatened rightly by some of the policies Donald Trump has talked about on the campaign trail. What are you saying to your constituents? What are you saying to other Democrats about what these next 4 years will look like?
Look, even if the Republicans win the House, which is a question mark, the Republicans are not going to have anything resembling a governing majority. And so House Democrats are the best hope for protecting our country from the extremes and excesses of a Donald Trump presidency, but I worry that he's more emboldened than ever before. I suspect the second Trump presidency is going to be more vindictive than the first. And the fundamental difference between then and now is that he enjoys absolute immunity. You know, he's free to weaponize government against his political rivals, which he refers to as the enemies from within. So I worry we're going to see a much more emboldened, much more vindictive Donald Trump than we've ever seen.
And Congressman, we have seen from his early personnel announcements, he intends to be very hardline on immigration. He made a campaign promise for mass deportations at a scale we've never seen before in this country. This is something that will impact your district, certainly. What preparations are you and other local officials taking? What is this going to look like?
Look, we're going to have to do everything we can to resist the worst of a Donald Trump presidency, but ultimately the president has ultimate authority over immigration. So there is a limit to what we can do, but for me, the best line of resistance is going to be the House Democratic caucus.
And you've been a strong defender of Israel, demands to bring the hostages home, fighting against anti-Semitism in New York City and the country. What does that relationship now between a Trump administration, Israel, and Gaza look like now?
It's unclear. There's no predicting the unpredictable, right? There are elements of the Trump administration that might be pro-Israel, but there are also elements of the Trump administration that are isolationist. And my argument is if America withdraws from the world and creates a power vacuum that's filled by the likes of China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran, that's ultimately a detriment, not a benefit to the U.S.-Israel relationship. So my argument from day one has been America first isolationism is no friend of the U.S.-Israel relationship.
Democratic Congressman Richie Torres of New York covering a lot of ground with us this morning. Congressman, thanks as always for being here. We appreciate it.
Absolutely.